What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, CK Snarks, a.k.a. Christian Corrales, from Bitcoin Media and Bitcoin Magazine, co-host of the POV Crypto Pod. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. Maybe for people that don't know, because I consume a lot of your content, either usually directly from Twitter. So maybe for people that don't know or are new to Bitcoin, what is Bitcoin Magazine's role in the space?
Yeah, so Bitcoin Magazine is the oldest Bitcoin, or one of the oldest Bitcoin media sites, and we have been since 2013. It was actually started by Vitalik Buterin, who is obviously very prominent in the Ethereum side of things now, but Bitcoin Magazine got taken over by David Bailey, the CEO of BTC Media, and we have been carrying on its legacy, and now we are the hub for Bitcoin forward and BTC only content in the Bitcoin space.
That's awesome. It's interesting you bring up Vitalik. Thought we'd get to that a little later in the show. What I'm thinking there is, obviously Bitcoin Magazine has evolved a lot over the years. Can you tell us a little bit about, maybe its history? Was it more cypherpunk in the beginning? Is it still cypherpunk? Is it geared towards, pre-coiners? Is there still a relationship with Vitalik?
Yeah, there's not really a relationship with Vitalik anymore. He's really focused strictly on Ethereum, and we are strictly focused on Bitcoin.
Sure.
In terms of the cypherpunk nature, I think that right now we very much embody the cypherpunk and Bitcoin forward and crypto anarchist and Austrian economics kind of side of the whole cryptocurrency aisle, and we try to embody that. We try to amplify the voices of the community around that, as well as again, be that kind of historical index of that time period. And we're working on surfacing all of that kind of historical cypherpunk Austrian Bitcoin history in unique ways moving forward too. So it's really about documenting what's coming, as well as resurfacing and educating what happened.
Right. And what is your role at Bitcoin Magazine?
Yeah. So Cedric, I am the head of media, or of all content at Bitcoin Magazine right now. I recently transitioned from doing YouTube and podcast content and managing that effort, and now really just a fresh role of just organizing all of the content that we are putting forward, moving on from this period of time. So we will probably be seeing a few kind of changes on the content strategy, but overall, I'm really excited to be pushing forward that role at Bitcoin Magazine.
Does that mean your role has kind of evolved from more of a podcast yourself? I believe you still podcast today, but doing a little less of that to manage more of the network efforts?
I mean, I wouldn't say like a network effort, but yeah, we have a team effort to make BitcoinMagazine.com happen, and I'm just kind of taking over responsibility of the greater product. Ultimately, I still have a very heavy hand in doing podcasts, and as well as other live streams and videos. But I'm definitely excited to help bring energy to Bitcoin guides and Bitcoin history and Bitcoin written op-eds and stuff like that that are hosted through our written mediums.
How much of the Bitcoin community do you think is moving to video? It seems like there's a large push right now. I'm not sure what you see coming down the line. And I ask that as someone who listens to a lot of pods and gets a lot of Bitcoin information from Twitter.
I mean, to be honest, my main sources for Bitcoin information is Twitter and podcasts. That's my mediums. Twitter is really kind of like the peak place for Bitcoin content, in my opinion. Like, that's the epicenter. And then when it comes to written, audio, visual, I'm just an audio learner. I used to make my mom read me my bio textbook when I was like in middle school and high school. And I'd always do well on those tests, but the audio version of things always went better for me. And I always did better in English class after I figured out that I could go and get the audiobook and listen to the audiobook instead of like dragging my feet through or, trying to like, skim through 20 or 40 pages of text.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that there's a macro move towards video and audio because of podcasts and YouTubes in general gaining prominence and, just overall understanding of the different learning styles. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I think that trend is just consistent in Bitcoin as with everything else.
Right. It's interesting.
I know that was kind of a roundabout answer.
No, it's great. You have an interesting vantage point and some, different takes on the Bitcoin and let's call it crypto space. And I think part of that is, you take the seat of the Bitcoiner in that conversation, and trying to, engage in that debate. So, how do you feel about, what do you think the effects of altcoins and other coins are on Bitcoin?
So I probably have a pretty unpopular opinion when it comes to altcoins. And I'm personally, as a person who is allocated primarily to Bitcoin, I think Bitcoin is the answer. I think Bitcoin is the future. I don't think that other altcoins are good investments. I don't think that altcoins are necessarily bad for Bitcoin. I think that altcoins are actually part of Bitcoin. And I think that the altcoin ecosystem and the altcoin economy is actually just part of the permissionless economy that is enabled by Bitcoin. Bitcoin enables a level of kind of permissionlessness, and it enforces and requires a level of responsibility that just wasn't acceptable in the traditional world. So I think that they are a side effect. And ultimately, when you look at the Bitcoin industry, altcoins are the first place where you see Bitcoin being the medium of exchange and unit of account. So they are very much part of the early stages of Bitcoin's growth, in my opinion. So I think that they're just part of the cycle. I think that they're natural. And while they are terrible investments, I don't think that they actually are a threat to Bitcoin.
Sure. And this is a Bitcoin show. But I'm curious, you use the word side effect or maybe externality. Do you see it as a positive side effect? Or, is it, and not so much from an investment framework, but more from a technological framework, trial and error, experimentation. Do you see it as I think I share the same opinion as you that, there's nothing that can hurt Bitcoin. But I'm trying to,
Bitcoin's an anti-fragile beast.
Right. I totally agree. I'm just trying to understand whether, because it was interesting. We had a conversation with Pierre and he saw it as an inevitable externality and not necessarily, I don't want to speak for Pierre, but he just saw it as like a spillover effect. When Bitcoin is kind of holding all the value it can, it's natural for some of that enthusiasm and market value to just spill out of that bucket. And I thought that was a really interesting take. But I'm curious if, if you see value in a project like Ethereum, and again, not from an investment perspective, but do you see there being a future for a platform like that? And not Ethereum, but any of these sort of attempts at a decentralized, computer or internet?
Well, I think that ultimately Bitcoin is the incentive to build the decentralized infrastructure that everyone is kind of marketing right now and today with these other projects. So in the end game, Bitcoin is the incentive that creates decentralized energy infrastructure. It is the incentive that creates hardened security. It is the incentive that takes custody of value outside of trusted third parties and puts them directly and distributes it into the hands of many users directly. Like Bitcoin causes all that stuff to happen. So like there's a lot of positive externalities of Bitcoin, but there are also externalities that Bitcoiners and Bitcoin maximalists, Bitcoin supremacists would find unsavory. And yes, they are unsavory. And I think the crux of it is investment advice. Yes, they pretty much are bad investments and there is bad marketing behind them. But ultimately, all of these things are vehicles to transport Bitcoin. Like I said this in an old podcast with Brady Swenson of Citizen Bitcoin, and that even if you have the worst shitcoiner of the worst shitcoiners, they're still closer to Bitcoin maximalists than a no coiner.
Right.
So if you just zoom out and you look at the grand scheme of things, everything is sucking into the black hole of Bitcoin. And if you fully appreciate what that looks like and what how messy that is, then you just kind of accept that altcoins are an inevitable part of that. And I think that ultimately altcoins are a way of onboarding people to Bitcoin because everyone has their own broken mental model of how the world really works. And there's only one real way that the world really works. And I think that Bitcoin is very well aligned with that. But Bitcoin is very harsh to people that aren't well aligned to that worldview already. I think Bitcoin is truth, but if you are really far away from Bitcoin's worldview, if your perception of reality is very different than the truth that Bitcoin's pushing, like you just have a long way to go. And altcoins are kind of the incremental move towards Bitcoin, even if they are fundamentally lies, in my opinion.
Right.
So I just think that as Bitcoiners, we need to be empathetic towards the learning process. Like the majority of Bitcoiners that were already predisposed to Bitcoin. Like, guess what I was before I became a Bitcoiner? Well, I was a libertarian. I was already entrepreneurial. I already cared about money. It's not a surprise that I'm into Bitcoin. So we need to have some serious empathy within our community. And we need to understand that this is a long and painful process for people to change their mental models. And again, I think like we don't know Bitcoin's ways. Bitcoin is way better at propagating its memes and its value than we are. And altcoins are just a natural derivative of that, in my opinion. And I know that that's a very unpopular opinion amongst Bitcoiners. So I'm sure a lot of your audience might not agree with me.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying yes, they won't agree with you. I'm just saying I think it's great to have the debate and to kind of not maybe, I'm trying not to be narrow-minded, but I think maybe now's a good time to talk about how you came to Bitcoin. It seemed like you were primed. How did you fall into the Bitcoin rabbit hole?
2017, class of 2017, really good friend of mine that I'd worked at a startup with, she, a female, was like, hey, you got to check out Bitcoin. And heard of Bitcoin many times before then, but it always like gone over my head. Everyone has their story of they heard of Bitcoin, didn't take it seriously. But at that moment, that was the first time I actually was like, okay, let's do a proper Google search. Let's find some resources. Let's spend some time digesting some audio content about this and learning about it. So it was, summer 2017. I was driving to a wedding in Mount Shasta. It was about a 4-hour drive from San Francisco. I was going by myself. And I binged every Laura Shin podcast that was available at that time on the way there and back. And by the end of the weekend, I was like, Bitcoin's the answer. That's the money of the future. I signed up for Coinbase and I bought $500 of Bitcoin, $100 of Ethereum, and $50 of Litecoin.
Right.
So that's how I started off. I ended up quitting my job like 4 or 5 months after that, just because I was so inspired by Bitcoin. And
so you quit your job
February 28th.
With no bird in hand.
I was working. I was just doing. Yeah, I quit my job with no plan. Just gonna write a blog and make shitloads of money on Bitcoin. But no, that's not what happened. I quit my job. December 2017, and thankfully, I convinced my parents to buy me a ticket to the North American Bitcoin Conference in Miami of January 2018. So I went to that. That was my Christmas gift from my parents, and networked my ass off and ended up getting a job with BTC Media. And here I am. Started off doing event sales there. We do a bunch of conferences, including the Bitcoin 2019 conference, which was fantastic. The Bitcoin 2020 conference, which unfortunately was a victim of coronavirus. And now we have turned our sights to the Bitcoin 2021 conference. So I was doing a lot of conference planning, as well as growing, making my own content, being a part of Bitcoin Twitter. And here I am now, 2.5 years leading the media effort at Bitcoin Magazine. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. Can you tell us about the Bitcoin conference? I didn't get to go this year. I think it was canceled. Or
no one did.
No one did. It was going to be my first time going. I've actually lived in San Francisco before, so it was going to be an opportunity to go back. But I've never been to a Bitcoin event in person. So what is the Bitcoin conference like?
So I can only tell you about Bitcoin 2019, but Bitcoin 2019 was absolutely fantastic. There's a really famous conference in Bitcoin history. It's Bitcoin 2013 in San Jose. It was like the first real Bitcoin industry event. A lot of people that was the founding of Zcash was at that event. Like the Winklevi were still hanging around. Like Brian Armstrong was had like a crappy table booth for Coinbase. Like that was really the first organized effort of Bitcoiners.
I think I just posted a clip of that today of Eric Voorhees speaking at the 2013 conference because it's one of my favorite talks I've ever seen.
So, yeah, I mean that conference is part of Bitcoin legend, and our CEO David Bailey, actually his inspiration to become an entrepreneur in the Bitcoin space stemmed from that conference as well.
I'm sorry, who?
And David Bailey, the CEO of Bitcoin Magazine, the owner of Bitcoin Magazine. And so he really wanted, so in 2019, Bitcoin Magazine went from being a news site to being the Bitcoin news site. And out of that, he wanted to bring back Bitcoin 2013. So that was the impotence for Bitcoin 2019. And I think on all accounts, we did that. A lot of people said that the vibe of that event was only rivaled by that of the Bitcoin 2019 conference. We had 2,000 people in San Francisco, Snowden dialed in from Russia or wherever the hell he is. So, and it was just honestly absolutely incredible vibes. So it was a life-changing event, and a lot of careers and companies were launched at Bitcoin 2019, and it's just 1 year out. And I think that we're going to look back on that event as being a pinnacle year in Bitcoin's history. Once again, Bitcoin 2020 was looking to be a fantastic event too, doubling the capacity, same venue, same everything, even better speakers, Tony Hawk, Nick Szabo as part of the lineup. But unfortunately, like I said, victim of coronavirus, and 3 weeks outside the conference, we had to postpone it. And now we have moved the event to Los Angeles. It's going to be the end of April 2021. We're going to have the same headliners, Tony Hawk and Nick Szabo, but we already have a fantastic cast of confirmed speakers for that event. And yeah, we're just gearing up to keep it going and keep, producing the best Bitcoin only event there is. Right. So think of there's a lot of fantastic community Bitcoin events, but think of really high production conference and having that focused only on BTC. That's what we're building.
That's great. What you mentioned us, having the new the 2021 conference in LA. The last one was going to be in San Francisco. What do you think? Because I think you have an interesting vantage point. Is a great Bitcoin city right now to be physically present in. If somebody was going to quit their job and go somewhere to be in the Bitcoin community, where do you think it's happening?
Well, prior to Corona, I would say that San Francisco obviously has a massive tech advantage, and then New York was really like the heart of the Bitcoin maximalist scene and energy. Outside of that, there's plenty of cities in Europe that you can reference as being great Bitcoin cities. I have never been to them, so I can't really recommend them. But post-Corona, New York and San Francisco have really seen a massive exodus of people and talent. And it seems as though there's not one in the US, there's not one place that has like a really strong magnetic force on Bitcoin talent outside of Austin, Texas. And I think that might be like a cop-out answer, but I really do feel like Austin kind of embodies what Bitcoin is right now. Bitcoin kind of has a lot of the Texas sovereign attitude, and New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles don't really have it. I think LA out of California is gaining a lot from the SF exodus. So LA is kind of like this sub area, but California itself politically is kind of counter to what Bitcoin represents politically to some degree. So I just think that, while California has a lot of benefits from the tech sphere, there is just an opposite energy, if you will.
Right. Considering
Texas is booming, New York and California are declining, and that's sad being a California Bitcoiner.
Right. Considering your role, your job at Bitcoin Magazine, do you have a lot of friends and family who approach you a lot about Bitcoin just to kind of pick your brain or just to kind of see what you're doing, or do you get a lot of serious questions about Bitcoin, or no one cares?
I think that I've only been in this role in a bear market, really. So the people reaching out to me asking questions has only increased, at least in the last 6 months. But prior to that, pretty much no one cared. And I would even go as far as not even mentioning that I worked in Bitcoin just because it would be a hassle, and it'd be easier just to say I work for a fintech media company, right? Because then they'd be like, okay, that's like a normal thing, and then move on, right? But if I said Bitcoin, then it'd be like, oh, what's this question? Is it a scam? Whatever. So, socially, I just generally, unless they're already into investing or into, something that I would bring up Bitcoin in, I just tend to avoid bringing it up.
Right.
Just because, I think the best way to pitch Bitcoin in a way that's not too in your face is to talk about Bitcoin without talking about Bitcoin.
Right. Talking about
Bitcoin
money.
Evangelists. Yeah. I mean, and it's never been easier to pitch Bitcoin, right? It's never been more obvious to normal people that the Fed and the presidency and all of these corporate elites and all of these politicians are in cahoots against them, and that the fabric of society is not fair. That idea has never been more palpable and more mainstream. So just talk about that stuff, and then when they ask you why do you like Bitcoin so much, be like, because of that.
Right.
Because Bitcoin's the alternative. So talk about Bitcoin without talking about Bitcoin is any advice I would give to other Bitcoin evangelists who are trying to just move the conversation along.
Yeah. I really enjoyed your work, especially through the bear market. One of the pieces that really stand out was the 4-piece series with Bitcoin Tina that you did back in the spring, late winter. Bitcoin Tina is a very influential Bitcoiner in my thinking, or has kind of motivated or inspired a lot of my thinking, or maybe I've just stolen his. So I'm wondering, and I think you put in, it's about 4 hours of content, and I'm sure you worked with him for a lot to put that together. Was there anything that you took away from that, whether, from the actual content or maybe just working with him on the side that kind of stuck out to you?
So, the Bitcoin Tina piece of content just took so much time, and I got to spend so much time with Bitcoin Tina, and he is just so knowledgeable and has so much experience. And, very few people are Bitcoin fanatics with his life experience. He's very much a boomer. He has seen a lot of the booms and busts that have happened over the last 40, 50 years. And he was investing in the markets the entire time and learning. And then he's applied just such interesting lessons to Bitcoin. I think the most important lesson that he pushes is the fact that Bitcoin adoption is going to happen a lot faster than we think. And that because Bitcoin follows an exponential adoption curve, that the numbers associated with Bitcoin's price are going to be very, very difficult for the human mind to wrap around. And the other aspect that, he really pushes that I think is completely valid is that money should be the riskless asset. So what does that mean? That means in a society that's functioning correctly and has a good tool as money, that money itself is something that you can hold and store value in without acquiring risk. And without that capability in society, it is extremely difficult to make proper economic decisions, because there is nothing that you can do that has no risk. Because in making economic decisions, essentially it's always about calculating the profit to risk reward, and then should you take the action. So without having essentially a floor or a basis or a place of neutrality in that calculation, it becomes very difficult to make proper economic decisions. And that more beyond that, that in order to have money that is a completely riskless asset, that you can't just use anything. There is a single proper tool in order to achieve that. There is a single proper thing that can achieve that. And it's not something that we come to with social consensus. It's not something that we get around and agree, hey, we're going to decide that this shape is what makes a good chair. It's like, no, there's one shape that makes a good chair. And when everyone sits on it, they independently come up with that decision because that's just the fact of the matter is. And the fact is that's also true with money. And there's one thing with one specific set of parameters that makes it the best money out there. And, again, that's something that we've been missing for a long time. And Bitcoin really fills that role better than anything else.
Yeah. Where do you see Bitcoin going over the next 3 to 5 years? Especially as someone, you've only been in the space for 3 years. What do you think is happening? What do you think is going to happen? And I'm not talking about price, but just, awareness, getting the message out, the conversation about money, maybe inflation. What's your outlook?
Growing exponentially in every way. A great Bitcoin Tina quote is, Bitcoin's like water. It gets everywhere and you can't stop it.
Right. I learned a lot from Bitcoin Tina. The way I've kind of framed it up was like he really helped me go from thinking about, Bitcoin as maybe digital gold in the way that, people in the mid-90s maybe thought about as Amazon competing with Borders. And they're just trying to dematerialize, the book warehouses. And yet, they're going to attack so many more verticals and just dematerialize retail. And the way he speaks about, how store value works, for the entire economy, across the verticals of real estate, stocks, bonds, and how Bitcoin's going to pull from that, I just thought was incredibly illuminating and reframed how I thought about money and made it a much bigger thing for me.
Well, when you understand that there is no riskless asset, that money no longer serves that purpose. That if anything, holding money is essentially acquiring inevitable. It's acquiring inevitable loss. That's why they say cash is trash and all that kind of thing. So Michael Saylor, recent Bitcoin hero, allocated so much of MicroStrategy's cash balance to Bitcoin. So when you understand that the store of value function of money is broken, and that a lot of asset prices are inflated because they're serving as stores of value, and then you understand that Bitcoin has all the properties to make a good money as a true riskless asset, then the next logical conclusion is that Bitcoin is going to suck value out of not just gold, not just fiat money, but also other things that serves as store of value.
Right. You bring up Michael Saylor, and he's really, the Chad of the scene right now. And, it's interesting with him because he really has a very, clear view of Bitcoin, and he's really almost leading the conversation now in a lot of ways. And he's the class of 2020. Maybe McCormack would argue class of 2019. But what I think is interesting about that is he's super smart. He's a rocket scientist, but he also had a $400 million problem that most people don't have to think about. And I think that, so I wonder how much, but you also see like Ali Humam from, Teeny's Restaurants, another class of 2020. And they seem to have picked it up a lot faster than I remember picking it up. And I wonder how much of that is.
Well, when did you join the Bitcoin community?
2017. So, but later than you, a little bit, a few months. Do you remember
what the educational content was like back then?
Yeah, I'll tell. I mean, it just kept popping up in my Twitter feed, and I'm not sure. Obviously, price was moving, so I'm not sure what made me go to Coinbase to look at price. I don't know if price was being shown to me on Twitter, and then over a week, it was moving 500 a day. But I'd heard about.
Get your attention.
But I had heard about Bitcoin before. Silk Road, Mt. Gox. I've always kind of been tuned in, but I never really understood the value prop. And even in 2017, it was completely speculative to me at the time. And I didn't have an understanding of it like I do now for at least 6 to 12 months. After listening to people, after going to Tales from the Crypt and Stefan Livera's podcast and listening to Bitcoin Tina a lot wherever I could find him. And whereas, someone like Michael Saylor's, I mean, maybe they're repurposing or digesting a lot of information that they gather, but they also seem to be leading the way and coming up with a lot of new ways to look at it. And I wonder how much of the class of 2020 is really just got a different view on it because they come through this financial crisis lens, where it's happening to their businesses.
Well, I would say that, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sure.
So I was actually talking to Bitcoin Tina earlier today, and he said, I hate OGs because all of these OGs from 2012, 2011 that got lucky and got into Bitcoin, and not to disparage them, many of them were predisposed to be able to take advantage of that opportunity, but their understanding of Bitcoin could be in their discovery of Bitcoin could have had nothing to do with, how correct their understanding of Bitcoin is, right? They could have been like, Roger Ver is a great example, emphatic Bitcoin supporter, early evangelist, could not be more wrong about BTC, right? So every generation of Bitcoiner got educated with better memes and better education, and odds are is they're going to bring a less crazy, more realistic, more understandable digestion and interpretation of Bitcoin moving forward. And every generation improves. So you're a great example of someone who came in 2017 and got educated by the 2015 uprising, right? Marty Bent, Stephan Livera, those were like the guys who were in it a little earlier. And now you are filling in that shoe. You're starting your show. You're creating Bitcoin content now. Like myself, class of 2017, I'm participating in educating the class of 2021 and class of 2020. So every time that new cycle comes in, it brings a bigger wave of new people that are less predisposed to Bitcoin, who have more real life experience, who can digest the better education and produce even better education out of it. It's just like this cycle of iteration and enlarging of the community and sharpening of the educational memes. It's a never ending cycle, and it never stops improving. Like when I asked you like how much content was out there, I remember looking for Bitcoin maximalist content in 2017. There was like 2 shows. There was Crypto Scam by Tone Vays, which was the production value was absolutely garbage. And then there was Bitcoin and Markets with Ansel Lindner, which is an absolutely fantastic show. And Ansel is a hero of mine. And lucky enough, I do co-host a show with him now called FedWatch. But now, like, there's literally endless fantastic Bitcoin maximalist podcasts. Like, you can't, like, I can't even name them all. There's so many, and I could probably recommend them all, even if I may disagree with them slightly. So it's just like the amount of fantastic information is exponentially better. And guess what? The class of 2024, they're going to have a slew of fantastic CEOs with great history and great experience that are going to be educating people about Bitcoin better and more eloquently than we could ever do it. So that's just how Bitcoin continues to level up, and it's not stopping. The exponential growth happens up, happens sideways, happens down. Bitcoin's like water. It's just getting everywhere.
When Bitcoin levels up and awareness levels up, do you think Bitcoin Twitter goes away? Do you think Bitcoin maximalism podcasts go away and are no longer needed if people are one day using Bitcoin like they use money? Like they use money, but like instead of fiat.
I think the need of arguing or warning people about why altcoins are bad investments will ultimately go away. But I don't know. I keep bringing up Bitcoin Tina, but he's the one with the life experience. I'm the young kid. So, he was telling me that the internet was one of those things that the early guys were talking about the internet like crazy in the 80s. And then by the time the 2000s came, no one could shut the fuck about the internet. And yet all the OGs were making money off of it. They were changing their phone number, they were moving, they were changing their address. They were doing everything to kind of get away from the masses. So I can envision that's what Bitcoin's going to be like as well. So right now we are in the 80s. We have, all these crazy evangelists talking about how, the potential of this new technology is. And by the time everyone else wakes up to, the internet of money, we'll have been made rich. We'll have been right for a long time. And we'll have been like, wow, welcome to the party.
Right.
This is uninteresting to me now. So I don't think, but I guess to get back to the question, like, will Twitter go away? The history of Bitcoin conversation has always been shifting and changing, but Twitter happens to kind of be this amazing platform, almost like this final platform, at least in the world today. So I just don't see there being a better platform than Twitter. Unless, I don't know. If I had the vision to know where it goes next, I'd already be building a following there. Mm-hmm. So right now it's Twitter, it's YouTube, it's your own media that you control, like your own website or your own newsletter, your own podcast, RSS feed. So that's where the conversation is happening. And yeah, I mean, again, I think Twitter is not something that's leaving our lives anytime soon, and it's going to be big for Bitcoin for a while.
Got it. What's your take on hyper Bitcoinization, and not in the framework of price or hopium? Just do you think such a thing happens? What kind of time frame are you looking at? What does it mean to you? What do you think it means for it to play out?
Okay, I have strong opinions about hyper Bitcoinization. Hyper Bitcoinization is happening right now. That's what we're living through. It's a process. Things get interesting only once hyper Bitcoinization is over and we have reoriented around the Bitcoin standard. That's like what happened to the world before the printing press, and then during, like when the printing press was becoming prevalent, and then the world post printing press. Like all of the amazing results of the printing press didn't happen until the printing press was prevalent everywhere. So the real benefits of the Bitcoin standard aren't going to happen until we're on the Bitcoin standard. And that's when things get really interesting. But specifically regarding hyper Bitcoinization, I would implore people to understand that hyper Bitcoinization is the world getting repriced in sats. And that happens in increments. It doesn't happen all at once. And if you look around, every single day, there is progress made. Every single day, we're chipping away at that goal. Every single day, we're chipping away at the dollar's dominance and at SOV value being stored elsewhere. So it's a process, and it's happening every single day. So that's my answer to what is hyper Bitcoinization, and what does it mean to me.
What's up with the home cooking? Do you love to cook? I see that in your profile on Twitter.
Yeah, no, home cooking is something I'm really passionate about. I'm a millennial. We order DoorDash and take pictures of avocado toast we spent $45 on. So I don't think we know much about home cooking or being homemakers, or even like the value of getting around the table and having a family meal. So I think that's sad. I think that there's just so many positive externalities, health, financial, livelihood that come from cooking. And it's just one of those things that I think that my generation really needs to turn the ship on if we're going to be healthy into the future. So I just keep advocating for it. Those are kind of like the two cornerstone things that I think can change your life, is adopting Bitcoin and adopting home cooking. So I keep pushing for it, and I'm very committed user of both in my life.
Right on. Someone who was primed for Bitcoin, has Bitcoin changed you outside of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I was already primed for it. It's just amplified who I was already, I think. So yeah, I mean, I've never worked harder than I do now. I've never put more hours. I've never tried to be as much of a professional. Before, I really was a 9-to-5 employee, and now I feel like I am mission driven, and I am constantly interested and intellectually stimulated by what I do. And it's because I'm so interested and captivated by Bitcoin itself. So, I mean, I think that Bitcoin changes people. I think that hard money value instills long-term thinking in people. I think that I was lucky enough to be raised in a way that already kind of possessed some of those things. And that's why I think that Bitcoin just kind of amplifies that for me. But, there's just countless stories of people that, quit smoking so they can stack more sats, that, the finiteness of Bitcoin and the fact that it can't be stolen away from you. It really empowers people. And I just think that that's something that can't be overstated. And I think that that's something that is really going to move. It's going to change human society on a magnitude that was previously thought to be impossible. And I think a really great example of that in practice is right now in human society, there's this massive conflict of like, how are we going to save the planet? Like, how are we going to be responsible with these finite resources that are on Earth? And what's the right way to, treat this common, right? And there seems to be no way to come to the answer of like what is actually happening and then what's the right thing to do. And if we could even agree on that, how do we coordinate everyone to do those things? And seamlessly, Bitcoin comes out of complete left field with this distributed proof of work algorithm that eventually is going to coordinate massive amounts of computers. And that right there might be the answer to how we're going to get our shit together and actually extract and allocate resources across the globe efficiently and in a way that doesn't destroy our planet or abuse the capacity that's there. Like, that kind of change politically, educationally, societally, it hasn't happened quite yet because of Bitcoin, but I never thought it could have been even humanly possible. But here we are, with this, speculative store of value, hard money thing that inadvertently might just do that. Like, I don't know, that it just blows my mind. Yeah. But yeah, that's like a macrocosm of like the microcosmic change that Bitcoin has in each individual person that will, hopefully in a Bitcoin world, lead to that end result. Yeah. Hope I don't sound like a crazy person.
No. Well, you sound like me. What do you think it is about Bitcoin that makes us go from zero to infinity? 5-6 months after you found it, you quit your job, you flew to a conference, you networked, you got a job in the industry, you're still in the industry. It doesn't look like you're ever going to go anywhere. Myself, not the same exact story, but I've been Bitcoin all day Bitcoin since, November of 2017. What do you think it is that just drives us all in?
I mean, it just, for a lot of people, I feel like they walk around and they just feel like something's wrong, but they can't put their finger quite on it. And I mean, ultimately, Bitcoin just crushes every mental model that you could have had about the world before. And it kind of like it re-explains everything, right? And repositions everything. So I think some people, they're just so humbled by that and so in awe of that. And they could have been searching for an answer for something that Bitcoin answers for them. And then it's just so powerful at that point, right? And I mean, in particular for me, like I've always been a passionate person and I was just looking for something to channel my energy on. And I just, happened to meet at the intersection of money, politics, and technology. And, Bitcoin was just all but too obvious.
Yeah. Do you think if you had found Bitcoin maybe 10 years earlier, you would have got it? Maybe 5 years earlier?
I was a lot. Yeah. I was too young and stupid at that point. I'm still a pretty young man. So honestly, I really think I hit it in the sweet spot. I heard about Bitcoin in 2011. I heard about Bitcoin in 2013 and 2015. I just didn't give it the time of day. I wasn't ready to give it the time of day. So I don't know. I think like a lot of my growth happened in between 2015 and 2017 that got me ready for it.
Yeah. I can see that. This has been really awesome. I really appreciate this. Can you let everyone know where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely.
All the places they can find you?
Yeah, so I do a lot of stuff, guys. On Twitter at @CK_Snarks. That's the best place to follow me kind of on my day-to-day. I'm always tweeting mostly about Bitcoin, but sometimes about home cooking and sometimes about other things in life. Beyond that, like I said, I'm putting out a ton of video and audio content at Bitcoin Magazine. That is all Bitcoin focused, everywhere from beginner content to advanced Bitcoin content. And then lastly, I do a show with David Hoffman, who is a prominent Ethereum influencer, called POV Crypto, where we go back and forth and we debate what's really happening in the Bitcoin and crypto ecosystem. So I would say that is very much advanced, nuanced content for Bitcoin and Ethereum believers who want to get into the weeds. But yeah, so Twitter, Bitcoin Magazine, POV Crypto, and then at @CK_Snarks everywhere.
That's awesome. This has been dope. I hope to see you at Bitcoin 2021 in LA.
Yeah, absolutely. Look it up. It's just look up Bitcoin 2021 or b.tc/conference. We are selling tickets, VIP, regular tickets. We have a fantastic group of speakers. And like I said, Bitcoin 2019, it was an absolutely legendary event, and we're working hard to capture that magic again.
Yeah, I saw the pictures. It looked awesome.
It was, man. It was. All right. Well, hey, thanks everyone. And again, thank you for having me.
Thanks, man. Peace. CK Snarks elaborates on the personification of Bitcoin right here on the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. And thank you for listening. If you dug the show, please vote with those thumbs and press those 5 stars. That's the best way to spread the word. This is Cedric. Peace.